Всем привет! Welcome back to this channel. If you're new here, my name is Elvin, and on this channel we explore filmmaking as well as strategies and tools to live a more happier, productive and inspired life. What you just saw is a little Instagram video that I made for Monster. It was sadly not sponsored whatsoever. It was just a personal practical project. A couple of people reached out to me in Instagram and asked me how did I create the intro and the outro with these moving leaves. So I thought it would be a good idea to make a tutorial, because when I was researching I was not able to find any videos that would help me to make my idea come to life. The storyline for this project started from the end. I wanted to create an outro with fruits mimicking the shape of the can in a jungle setting. The fruits would then transition into real can using fire transition, which ended up being an orange light leak, and I wanted to create depth by making the can seem behind the leaves. I felt this would be a great way to highlight the tropical fruits that are used for this flavor of Monster. This led to the idea of the intro. I wanted the audience to feel as if they're moving through the jungle, finding the beast on the other end. Question was, how can I pull this off without living near a jungle? I began my search by going to various stock footage websites, both free and paid, and could not find anything that would remotely resemble something that I would want to create. When I was close to giving up on this idea, then it suddenly struck me. I could create my own background. Image-wise, I was able to find something really quickly that I really liked, and best of yet, it was royalty-free. With the image chosen, I loaded up into Photoshop. To animate an image and to create depth, it is important to have separate elements of that same image separated from the background. So I proceeded to cut out various leaves one by one, and to make this process as simple as possible, I used a pen tool in order to make my selections. Considering that the leaves have a very uneven shape, pen tool really helps out to create those curved lines. Once I created a path, I right-clicked, pressed make a selection, and then pressed mask to isolate only the part that was selected. For best results, I advise you not to rush with this process. Take your time, make your selections, turn it into a mask, and then review every single mask. Zoom in, make sure that you have all your lines selected and smooth as possible. I advise you to also feather a little bit your edges, because remember guys, in this world everything has a little bit of blur. There's nothing that is laser sharp, and when you try to blend images together, sharp lines is your #1 enemy. Now that I cut out all the leaves that I wanted, the next step was to rebuild some of the leaves that were covered by the foreground layer in the original image. To do this, I referred back to the original image and tried to pinpoint some leaves that had some similarities with the one I'm trying to rebuild. So I make a copy of the upper leaf, remove a little bit of the opacity, and then size it and position it in a place that I feel will work best with the other layer. Now that I positioned the leaf, it's time to blend both of the layers together. And to do this, I do everything using masking. There's nothing fancy here. So let's start with the underlying layer. I want to remove this excess part right here. So let's press on the mask itself. Let's press B to make sure we're using a brush. And ensure you're using black, because black removes parts of the images. And start painting over the areas you want to remove. Just like this, as long as both the underlying layer and the foreground give you a nice shape. Now here on the other side, I can see we don't have enough of the leaf, so I'll have to shape it the other one, meaning the foreground. So let's select that layer. We are already using black. I will remove my hardness to roughly 70% just to match the edges of the rest of the image. And let's just paint in and shape the leaf just like this. Let's see. Okay, this is probable. One thing I learned over the years is that you don't need to be super precise. It's not really something that people will notice as long as the overall shape is okay. So this is enough. It follows the line, it looks real. And now it's time to blend. To blend both the layers together, I use masking as well. I will right click, I will reduce the hardness all the way to 0. I will also reduce the size a little bit. And I like to also remove or reduce my flow all the way to roughly maybe 45–50%. This just allows me to smoothly mask in or out items from the image. It helps to blend in better. And let's just work the edges. Just remove the edges. There we go. I can see it's a little bit too much here, so I'm gonna press X to go back to white. Let's paint it back. There we go. again X, go back to black, and just remove the other parts. I'll just change the size a bit more. Just too much. There we go. I will also perhaps just mask out a little bit these edges, just to connect a little bit better with the lighting. There we go. See how it just connects a little bit? It looks more probable like these sections right here. So I think this is nice. Now let's zoom out. And overall, I would say this looks pretty probable. Now, once you go through this whole process, you'll end up with something like this. So you have a bunch of different leaves, each one of them a separate layer that allows you to then play around with all of them when you're animating them. And as you can see, I have this very big foreground leaf, and actually I have two versions of it. Once I remove them, you can see that in this case, I do have the completed leaf. And this just gives you flexibility when you're animating. You don't need to worry that parts of your leaves are missing, which can be a pain in the ass when you're trying to animate it. Now the only thing left is just to save each an individual leaf as a separate PNG file. So let's look at how we can animate things in Premiere Pro and make our idea come to life. And for this demonstration purposes, I'll actually show you my original project. And as I promised, there's nothing very fancy or crazy to do this. All we're gonna be playing around is with the position and the scale of our items. So this is my outro. Let me play it one more time for you. Now, once you import your leaves and you position them where you want to in your composition, and it's always good that you put your cursor on the beginning of the video, and then to animate it, all you have to do is just to press on this timer icon beside every single parameter. And what this toggle allows you to do is, rather than just having a specific parameter stay on one value during the whole clip, you can make this parameter change in value over time. For instance, at the start of the clip, you can have your size at 0, and then until the end, it can go all the way to 100. And this is how you can create, for instance, zoom. So this is exactly the principles I used in this case. As an example, here's one of the leaves that is in the composition. We are at the beginning of this whole sequence, and I positioned it and scaled it as follows. Now, to create animation, what we need to do is we need to define a different set of values, in this case both scale and position, by the end of this whole clip. So watch closely how the whole leaf transforms, as well as how the position and the scale values change as I scroll through the whole timeline. So as you can see, the leaf grows in size and also moves to the left. Now, the reason why I'm changing the position and the scale as well is to mimic how we humans see when we are, let's say, passing by something. Every item always moves away from our field of view, so to the left or to the right, and also at the same time it zooms in. It's the same principle applied in this case. Now, also it's important to notice that when you have this animation toggle on, beside the parameters you'll see this blue dots. These blue dots define the parameters to which Premiere Pro will move or transform your image to. So from the beginning of the clip, which has completely different values, it will change the values to go to those ones with the blue dots. And you can have as many as you want. And the cool part is that to cycle between all of them, it's super easy. Just press on these little arrows, and this is known as keyframing. So let's press on it and it jumps back to the beginning of our clip. And as you can see, I have also here the same blue dots with completely different parameters, so it moves between one or another. And this is basically how you create animation. It's super easy, you don't need to go very crazy about it. So for this project, what I did was I imported all the leaves that I wanted to, I scaled them and positioned them to create a composition, and once I was happy with it, then I went to the end and I manually input different scales and positions for each and every leaf so that they all move independently. And one important thing that I really have to touch on is creating depth using blur. You might not notice it here, so I'll actually go into full screen. And as you can see, every layer, every leaf that you can see has a varying degree of blur, both in the background and in the foreground. This way, you create this whole depth of field and you mimic the focal length. Very, very important. Make sure that only your main subject is in focus. The rest, add at least a little bit of blur just to separate it from everything else. And once I applied it here, it looks just absolutely incredible. And the whole concept continues throughout the whole clip. And this is the same principle I applied for the intro of this video. It's just way more exaggerated, there's way more leaves. However, one thing that I did different was, rather than just using Gaussian blur to blur out each individual leaf, I actually applied a directional blur. And yes, I went one by one to each one of them and I programmed it. Now the reason why I use directional blur is because we can create a angled blur, which helps to sell the whole effect of movement. As an example, this leaf right here has the blur pointing towards the side diagonally. This leaf right here is pointed downwards, this one is diagonal to the right, and so on and so forth. And to mimic motion blur, I once again created animation for every single blur. So from the beginning to end, the degree of the blur increases dramatically. Well, there you go, nothing really too complicated. I hope you found this video helpful, useful, and interesting, and as always, thank you for watching, and I see you in the next one. Пока!